The grand ballroom of the Fairmont Regency gleamed like a jewel box, its crystal chandeliers raining soft light over tuxedos, silk gowns, and million-dollar smiles. Paparazzi flashes erupted outside the gold-trimmed entrance, cameras clicking in a frenzied rhythm as the doors swung open. Elijah Westbrook had arrived. He was the very picture of stoic wealth, broad-shouldered in a custom Tom Ford tux, his expression unreadable beneath the sharp planes of his face. But what truly sent a ripple through the elite crowd wasn't the Westbrook heir himself. Fit was the woman on his arm, Lena Carter, moved like she'd been born to this world of diamonds and whispered judgments. A scarlet gown hugged her like a scandal waiting to happen. Her smile, perfect, radiant, slightly dangerous, dared anyone to question her place at Elijah's side. Her hand rested lightly on his arm as if it belonged there, fingers curled possessively, yet with just enough ease to suggest affection. Gasps and murmurs followed them like perfume. The media snapped furiously, breathless headlines already composing themselves. Elijah Westbrook breaks silence, brings mystery woman to gala. Across the room, his family stiffened like ice cracking under pressure. His mother, Margot Westbrook, lifted her champagne flute to her lips, but her eyes never left Lena. His older brother Julian leaned in to whisper something acidic. None of them smiled, but Lena did. She leaned in close, her lips brushing Elijah's ear as she whispered, voice velveted with mock intimacy, "Smile, darling, we're being paid to love each other." He didn't flinch, didn't even blink. His face remained the perfect mask of calculated detachment as they moved through the crowd, accepting air kisses and thinly veiled questions. Every glance, every touch was performance, and they were both experts on the stage. Later, away from the champagne and scrutiny, they stepped into a private elevator lined with mahogany and mirrored gold. The doors slid shut with a hush of luxury, and the moment they were alone, Lena exhaled and dropped the act like a fur coat hitting the floor. She pulled off her chandelier earrings and rubbed her temples, eyes closing for a beat. "That performance was worth an Oscar," she said dryly. "You owe me another $100,000. Elijah didn't respond immediately. He stared at the reflection of their bodies in the elevator mirror, the perfect couple, curated to distract, deceive, and control. Then he turned his gaze toward her, unreadable, cold. Lena met his eyes with a smirk that held no warmth. She was beautiful, yes, but there was steel beneath the silk. She was not just a pawn, neither was he. Whatever this was, it wasn't love. It wasn't even affection. It was a transaction, a game, and the stakes had just risen. The question wasn't who was faking it, it was who would win. Lena Carter had once stood under stage lights, not paparazzi flashes. Born and raised in Atlanta, she grew up reciting Shakespeare in her bedroom mirror and chasing curtain calls like oxygen. By 23, she was hailed as one of the most promising stage actresses in the Southeast, a name whispered in theater circles with awe. Then came New York, and then came the fall. A high-profile betrayal by a mentor she'd once trusted one. That left her reputation tainted, and her name dragged across internet gossip. Columns ended her trajectory in an instant. It wasn't the mistake that ruined her, but the way the narrative was rewritten without her voice. The power to control the story had been in someone else's hands, and that still burned. Now, Lena juggled bartending shifts in a dim Lower East, side dive bar, and occasional roles in cramped off-Broadway theaters where the audience barely outnumbered the cast. She lived in a walk-up that shook when the subway passed, guarded her heart like a wounded animal, and trusted no one but herself. She was bitter, Yes, but she was also sharp, emotionally self-sufficient, and dangerously observant. She had learned to read people quickly, to adapt, and to survive with a kind of elegant defiance. Elijah Westbrook had never known survival in the way Lena had. His world was carved from privilege, power, and precision. As the second son of Real estate titan Charles Westbrook, Elijah had been sculpted from a young age into the perfect heir, ruthlessly intelligent, emotionally detached, and obsessed with control. His older brother Julian had faltered early, too entangled in scandals and recklessness to be trusted with the empire. Elijah, meanwhile, kept his life devoid of entanglements, clean, controlled, strategic, but Charles, now sick and fading, had clung to an archaic clause in the family trust. The next Westbrook to take the helm of the company must be married to someone respectable, with the appearance of stability and traditional values. It was a power move disguised as morality, and Elijah knew it. And so did the board, circling like vultures, waiting to question his claim. With time running out, Elijah made a decision that only someone like him could justify. Clinical, transactional, cold. He went to a casting director he'd used once to hire a party of socialites for a Hamptons fundraiser, and said, "Find me someone who can act like she loves me, convincingly." Enter Lena Carter. Her resume was a stack of near misses and forgotten plays, but her audition, if one could call their first meeting, that was flawless. She was beautiful, but more importantly, she was believable. And when she looked him in the eye, there wasn't a flicker of intimidation. He offered her $1 million to pretend to be his wife for a year, long enough to pacify the board and secure his position. The terms were rigid. No real intimacy, appearances together once a week at minimum, always in public, separate bedrooms. She'd be given a wardrobe, a driver, a script to study. She would be trained in the Westbrook way: manners, history, politics, alliances. Above all, she would not embarrass him. He made it clear this wasn't a romance. It was a business arrangement. Lena took the deal with a smirk and a raised brow, like a woman already aware that people like Elijah thought they were always in control. To her, it wasn't love she was faking, it was power. She saw it as the ultimate role, a mask that might finally allow her to rewrite her story on her own terms. And Elijah, for all his cold brilliance, believed he could keep her and himself neatly within the boundaries he'd drawn. But rules rarely survive proximity. Week after week, their staged affection brushed against something real. The glances lingered, the tension simmered. Lena, with her wit and fire, began to crack the ice Elijah had spent decades perfecting. And Elijah, with his stillness and quiet wounds, began to awaken something Lena had long buried, the possibility that trust, even if manufactured, might still grow into something dangerous and true. What neither of them anticipated was how pretending to love each other might become the most honest thing they'd ever done. The Westbrook Foundation's board dinner was the kind of event designed to lull enemies into false comfort crystal stemware, candlelit florals, and quiet string quartets echoing against marble. Lena knew her role well by now. She played the perfect wife, draped in navy silk, smiling with subtle precision, responding to invasive questions with wit and warmth. Elijah stood beside her like a monument, still, powerful, untouchable. The board members, mostly men in tailored suits with thin smiles, watched them like chess players eyeing a tricky endgame. But beneath the polished civility, the room pulsed with tension. And Lena had learned how to listen when no one thought she was paying attention. It happened near The end of the evening, while she refreshed her lipstick in the hallway just outside the powder room, voices low, careless drifted from a cracked door to a private lounge. She recognized one of them instantly. Darren Westbrook, Elijah's cousin and longtime rival. The other was unfamiliar, but clipped and eager. "If the wife is fake," the man said, "we can unravel the entire claim. We've got a pie already pulling records bank statements, leases, old interviews. She's not who she says she is." Darren's laugh was sharp. "Of course she's not. She's a seat filler in a borrowed gown. When we expose that, Elijah's position crumbles and so does she." Publicly, the chill that gripped Lena had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She moved away before they noticed her, her heels silent against the carpet. All at once, the performance felt thinner, more fragile. It wasn't just Elijah's empire at risk, it was her name, her past, her future. She'd signed an NDA, and if this blew up, she'd be the scandal. Again, disposable. Back at the penthouse, silence stretched between them as she removed her earrings and wiped off her lipstick with clinical swipes. She didn't play coy, just walked straight to where Elijah stood by the bar, pouring himself a drink like nothing had shifted. "They're digging, Elijah," she said, voice low but steady. "Your cousin. He hired someone. If this falls apart, I take the hit. I signed the end." Elijah didn't even look at her at first, just sipped his scotch. "Let them dig," he said finally, calm as ever. "You won't be the one who gets burned." But that was the moment it all snapped into focus for Lena. He wasn't reassuring her, he wasn't protecting her, he wasn't even seeing her. She was a shield, apropos another line item on his list of corporate maneuvers. The idea that she might suffer collateral damage didn't faze him because she wasn't real to him. Not truly. Not like his company. Not like his inheritance. Something in her hardened. This wasn't just about playing a role anymore. It wasn't about the money or the headlines or pretending to belong. This was war, dressed in diamonds. And she was done being anyone's pawn. If Elijah saw this as a game, fine, she'd learn the rules, memorize the board, and find every weak spot in his strategy, but she wouldn't be the one to fall when this came crashing down. She'd been thrown to the wolves once before. This time, she'd lead the pack. Lena Carter began to change, and the transformation wasn't subtle. It was surgical. Every morning, she woke with a sharper edge, dissecting the Westbrook world piece by piece until it no longer intimidated her. She studied the company's annual reports like a script, memorizing names, mergers, assets, and rivalries until she could discuss Westbrook Holdings with the fluency of a legacy insider. She watched socialites with clinical precision, mimicking their drawls, their posture, the subtle etiquette of wealth, the way they tilted their heads when listening, the practiced boredom, the invisible pecking orders. She learned fast, and she learned well. The woman who had once waited tables in dingy Manhattan bars now moved through country clubs and boardrooms like she was born there. But it was with Charles Westbrook that she played her most delicate role. The patriarch was dying slowly, stubbornly, and his approval remained the final lever Elijah needed. Lena approached him not with flattery, but with unfiltered charm and a wit that reminded him of his own late wife. She teased him over chess games, brought him forbidden bourbon in a teacup, and listened when he ranted about how softness had no place in business. And yet, in private, he began requesting her company more than Elijah's. He trusted her, maybe even liked her. It was a dangerous victory in public. Lena became the embodiment of the Westbrook ideal, poised, gracious, quietly brilliant. But behind the scenes, she was playing a deeper game. She asked quiet questions, traced subtle alliances, and always paid attention when people assumed she wasn't listening. The arrangement, once transactional, was now survival, and oddly, Elijah had become the most unpredictable part of the script. At first, he seemed untouched by her evolution, observing from a distance, like she was an experiment unfolding. But then the distance narrowed. He started watching her when she didn't know it, his gaze lingering during dinners, or when she laughed too hard at a joke, or when she softened while talking about theatre. He noticed how she handled pressure. With elegance, how she carried herself even when whispered about. He stopped correcting her. He started defending her. Late at night, when the house was quiet and formalities had peeled away, he let down his guard in pieces. Lena discovered he had a love for old jazz records, that he played piano in the dark when sleep wouldn't come. She saw how he protected his younger sister Brielle from their family's suffocating expectations, offering her rare moments of tenderness that didn't align with his cold reputation. There was something bruised in him, something she hadn't expected. Lena told herself it was part of the role, this growing awareness of him, but her thoughts kept drifting back to his hands brushing hers accidentally, or the way his voice softened when he forgot to be the version of himself the world expected. The walls between them were thinning. Tension buzzed between glances, in half conversations, in the space between their separate bedrooms, and then everything unraveled. It was an accident, an oversight on his part. She wasn't even snooping. A contract had been left open on his desk while he was out. She recognized her name, the legal language of their agreement. But what made her pulse go cold was a hidden clause, buried deep in legalese. If their marriage was revealed to be fraudulent, not only would she forfeit the agreed-upon payment, but she would also be liable for defamation and damages. A scorched earth clause, one that would leave her ruined. She read it 3 times before she sat back, her stomach twisting. This hadn't been a partnership, it had been a trap. He had written in her destruction from the beginning. When he returned, she didn't wait. She stood in the center of the living room, the contract still in hand. "I played your part," she said, voice low, eyes blazing. "Now you play mine. How does it feel to be lied to?" Elijah didn't deny it. He didn't even look surprised. He simply poured a drink, his silence an answer in itself. "I was protecting myself," he said quietly, almost regretfully. "I've been burned before, Lena. You think I'm cold, fine, but love is the most dangerous scam of all. I've watched it tear people apart. My father used it to control us. My mother used it to humiliate him. I won't let anyone have that kind of power over me." That clause wasn't about protection, she snapped. It was a warning. "You were always planning to walk away clean, no matter what happened to me." He said nothing. And that silence, that maddening practice silence, was the last. Crack. She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. But she didn't leave. Not really. She couldn't. Not yet. Too many pieces were still in play. Too many questions unanswered. And despite everything, despite the betrayal, the bitterness, something raw still pulled her back. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was strategy. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the terrible, growing suspicion that behind all his walls, Elijah Westbrook might not be the only one afraid of what this had become. The secret broke like a storm. Headlines screamed within hours. Asterisk, Westbrook heirs marriage a sham. Photos, documents, whispered testimonies, all carefully timed and orchestrated, flooded the media. Darren Westbrook had done it. He'd exposed the truth. Lena Carter wasn't some well-bred socialite from Connecticut. She was an actress, a hired face, a fraud. News segments played surveillance photos of her old bartending job, clips from obscure theater performances, and unnamed insiders confirmed the marriage was staged for business gain. Within minutes, Lena's name was once again dragged through the mud, her past held up for public scrutiny. Elijah's empire trembled, and the board, smelling blood, prepared to strike. But Lena didn't hide. Instead, she walked straight into the chaos at a hastily called press conference. She stood in front of 100 flashing cameras, poised and heartbreakingly sincere. Dressed simply, no diamonds or designer gowns, just a woman, stripped bare, ready to reclaim her voice. "Yes," she said, her voice steady, clear. "I was an actress. I was hired to play a part. But what you don't understand is that no one forced me to stay. Elijah Westbrook didn't manipulate me. If anything, I let myself believe it was real. I fell for him. And I believed, in those quiet moments between the performances, that he felt the same." The room went silent. What followed was unprecedented, a wave of public sympathy. The press, once hungry for scandal, now spun a new story * Cinderella among the billionaires. The actress who fell in love with her own fairy tale, * Lena, became a symbol, not of deceit, but of humanity. Her vulnerability disarmed them all. And then, just when Darren thought he'd won, the tide turned. Lena stepped back up to the podium, her hands trembling only slightly as she produced a tablet. "But if we're going to talk about deception," she said, her tone sharper now, "let's talk about who orchestrated this." She clicked through photos, grainy shots of Darren meeting with private investigators in shadowy restaurants. Cash changing hands, envelopes being passed. Then came the audio. Crisp, clear recordings of Darren bribing board members, plotting to leak manipulated timelines, threatening to weaponize Lena's past. "If we make her the villain," he said in one recording, "Elijah falls with her." The room erupted. Gasps, questions, shouted demands for statements. Elijah watched the entire thing unfold from the back of the room, frozen. He hadn't known. He hadn't planned for this. And Lena, after everything, after the claws, after the lies had protected him, she hadn't just defended herself, she'd saved him. He found her alone backstage afterward, standing in the wings with her arms wrapped around herself like armor. For once, she didn't look like a strategist. She looked tired, hollow. "Why?" he asked, his voice low, rough with something close to disbelief. "After everything I did, after that. Claws, why would you protect me?" She turned to face him slowly. Her eyes were glossy but defiant, shining with something raw. "Because for a moment," she whispered, "I wasn't acting. And I needed to know if you weren't either." He reached for her hand, but she stepped back, breaking the spell. This time, when she walked away, she didn't look over her shoulder, and Elijah knew he'd won the company, but lost the only thing that ever felt real. 3 months passed, and Lena Carter became a name spoken with reverence, instead of ridicule. The scandal had ignited something the world hadn't expected, not her downfall, but her rise. She landed a breakout role in a quietly brilliant indie film inspired, somewhat loosely, by her own story. A woman caught between survival and love in a world built on image. The reviews called her luminous. The buzz turned into award speculation. For the first time in years, Lena walked onto a stage, not pretending to be someone else, but celebrated for being exactly who she was, with the spotlight no longer a weapon but a platform. She launched a foundation for women in the arts, especially those who had been silenced, typecast, or written out of their own stories. Grants, workshops, mentorships. She didn't just rebuild her life, she extended a hand to others climbing out of their own ruins. Her face, once plastered across gossip rags with cruel headlines, now graced the covers of Variety and The Atlantic, framed by bold fonts about resilience, reinvention, and power reclaimed. Elijah Westbrook, meanwhile, changed in quieter ways. After Darren's downfall and the board's reshuffling, he had secured control of Westbrook Holdings, but instead of tightening his grip, he surprised them all. He dissolved its most toxic divisions, sold off legacy assets that had once defined the company, and opened a music therapy foundation in his father's name. It wasn't announced with fanfare or press releases. It simply began small, steady, deeply personal. For the first time, Elijah created something that wasn't about empire. It was about healing. He didn't reach out to Lena, not at first. Perhaps he believed she wouldn't want to hear from him. Perhaps he was right. But on the night of her film's premiere, in a velvet dark theater packed with critics, artists, and flashing cameras, he slipped into the back row. No entourage, no announcement, just him, watching silently as she appeared on screen, transforming pain into performance, turning fiction into something far more real than their contract had ever been. He sat through the final frame, through the credits, through the standing ovation that followed, and when the theater emptied and the photographers rushed outside, he waited in the shadows near the alley entrance, hands in his pockets, unsure if he had any right to stand there. She emerged, in a flood of laughter and flashes, radiant in silver, but she saw him instantly. She didn't falter, didn't flinch. "You fooled everyone," he said quietly as she approached, voice half apology, half for, "including me." Lena smiled sharp, knowing, unbroken. "You taught me how." They stood in silence then, the noise of the crowd fading behind them, something tender hanging between them, finished, uncertain. Finally, Elijah stepped closer. "Do you want to try again?" he asked, his voice no longer guarded. This time, without contracts. Lena looked at him for a long beat, and then slowly, beautifully she nodded. Because this time, they weren't pretending. The cafe was quiet, tucked away on a tree-lined street where no one cared about last names or legacy. No cameras, no curious stares, just 2 mugs of coffee, the clink of spoons, and the late afternoon sun slanting through the windows. Lena laughed, genuine, unguarded. That's something Elijah had said, her hand brushing his across the table without thinking. He was different now, not entirely changed, but softened. The angles in him had dulled, his voice easier, his silences less defensive. He still carried weight, but now it sat beside him, not on him. She reached into her bag, pulled out a folded, worn script, the pages creased from hours of rehearsal. "I've got a call back next week," she said, thumbing the margins. "Want to help me run lines?" He raised a brow, teasing. "Only if I get to play the romantic lead." She grinned, that familiar spark in her eyes. "You always wanted." The difficult roles, they opened the script together. The words between them no longer a script for survival, but just lines fiction they could step into without masks. No contracts, no pretending, just a clean scene, take one. And this time, it was real.